Hey guys, Tarke and a cat. I figured you'd be more interested in seeing that than the top of my head, so whatever. Um, this is a video I've been planning for a while, but I kind of got beat to the punch a little bit, so damn you, preach. But yeah, so how will demon hunters work? How do we think they're going to work? Um, as I just mentioned, Preach uploaded a video about this yesterday, and I was watching it, and he actually picked up a few things I completely missed. The whole idea of auras is something they've talked about briefly at points, and I completely missed that. Um, Now, if you actually go onto the WoW website, they have a little bit of info here. And if you read this bit on meta, they can grant powerful supportive auras. So we can only imagine that Metamorphosis is some kind of like big cooldown. You activate it, and then the whole raid, or maybe melee, but like it's an aura. So following logic of auras in other games, there'll be some kind of buff circle, so it might only affect melee or if the raid stacks up. Anyway, some kind of aura which buffs in some fashion the raid. So that's pretty cool. Now, when I first started planning out this video, I actually made a Reddit thread about this about a week or so, which I'm going to show you a bit later. And I was kind of talk about how I think I would want Demon Hunters to work out and where I think they'll go with it, and kind of just having some fun, fleshing out, seeing where it might go. Probably just to be proven wrong in 2 weeks' time when we get to BlizzCon. Now, the main thing which I again didn't really pick up on, but I only just sort of noticed when I looked back into it now and I was analysing this post watching Preacher's video, is the name of the spec, right? So we get this very cool picture and all that stuff. You come down. Vengeance. Havoc, DPS, Vengeance as tank. So I was like, Vengeance, why would they call it that? Because they're trying to make the specs feel kind of unique with all the class. They say they want to rebrand them to get better sense of class identity. So if they want to call it Vengeance, I can only imagine that some form of reflect mechanic or empowered mechanic. So what are you doing, cat? Sorry, the had to restart it. The cat was throwing me off. She basically just sat on the side of the chair for ages, just rocking, and it was really off-putting. Anyway, editing. So there's this whole empower mechanic. The way I sort of see it working is rather than just having standard fury like a warrior, and it's just you gain fury, or in the case of warrior, rage, and then you use your abilities which cost rage. I think we may actually end up in a case where there are kind of 3 tiers of ability, or 3 kinds of ability. So you have 1, generate fury, right? So just green auto attack, right? 2, fancy green auto attack, which spends fury. And then 3, normal move, which then becomes super cool move depending on how much fury you have. So you kind of have like the generator, the spender, and then the normally a cooldown which becomes more powerful kind of thing. So sort of similar to mechanics you see in MOBAs. There's a lot of that, there's mechanics like Dota 2 and LoL which kind of use that sort of stuff. And we haven't really seen that much of it in WoW. I think Demonology Warlocks kind of have something sort of similar, and Destro to some extent, where Chaos Warlock becomes more powerful the more of your resource that you spend on it. So they sort of have that, but I think not quite to this extent. So imagine ability goes from like a 3 AoE to a 15-yard AoE cleave, right? Kind of something along those lines. Again, I could be overreading it, but you look here at this whole melee damage section. If they just wanted to say that demon hunters have magic and physical strikes, then why would they say the chaotic energy flows within and empowers? The fact they say empowers really suggests to me that there'll be some kind of mechanic like that. Now, the other thing which I found interesting is they're really trying to push this unrivaled mobility. They're really trying to say this is agile. But you already have bears and you already have monks. Now, with both bear and monk tanks, it is you have dodge. You press a button, you dodge more, right? I think what they might try and do to, again, really recapture the fantasy of it all, with the description of spectral sight, the demon hunter's apparent blindness belies their true powers of perception. They rely on magically augmented sight to detect enemies, right? So detects and all that sort of stuff. And then here they say something here, sorry, with enhanced awareness, right? Now, I feel like they're pushing it too much just to say, oh, they've got like a 2-minute cooldown which lets them see through a wall. I think what might be a mechanic, and it may just be a fancy way of saying you press this button and then the next hit does less damage. I think the way that Demon Hunter Tank is going to work is about, you know, perceiving or sensing the damage before it comes in, right? So you press this button and then the next hit does something. So rather than having a static duration, so you press this button, you take less damage for 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, it'll be you press this button and you dodge the next hit or the next 3 hits. We already know Demon Hunters have a similar mechanic to this from the Gamescom preview they showed, where they showed off their Vault ability, where they sort of backflip backwards, then forwards again, and they gain a buff where they like dodge the next attack. So we already know this is part of the class, and as someone who plays a Brewmaster Monk with a lot of melee DPS, if I start rolling around, I'm gonna really annoy a lot of my damage dealers. So I can't imagine that they want Demon Hunter tanks in the middle of a raid fight, especially with the new updated boss movement, to leap back 15 yards, dragging the boss with him, leap forward again, drag the, like, as a melee DPS, that would be terrible, right? So I think that's purely going to be the DPS move, right? So the DPS spec will get Vault, just as kind of like a PvP thing or like a solo content thing. And then the tanks, again, if you look at their meta form is a lot stockier. It doesn't have the wings. So they'll just kind of like bulk down or block, or, you know, kind of get what I'm saying? So we more kind of like they just sort of get ready for the attack rather than leaping away. And then that way you don't just think, oh, it's Monk 2.0, where the Monk rolls around a lot. Instead, it's like, yeah, no, we go beef mode when we're in meta. I don't know. Again, it could be me reading into it too much, but I think that would be quite an interesting and unique mechanic that we haven't seen yet. And we already have 5 tanking specs. And, you know, people are kind of bored of those. I play a tank. I mostly play Brewmaster and Blood DK, but I also have a Prot Warrior and a Bear. And there isn't that much flavour, to be perfectly honest. Most tanks sort of just work with, this is the button you press, you take less damage. This would be a bit more engaging, because you kind of can't just watch your, you know, raid, whatever add-on you, so say DBM or whatever. You can't just watch the timer and go, oh, press the button. You'd have to be really good on making sure that, oh, the next 3 hits, so you've got to time it really, you know, close. So imagine Manaroth. You know, Manaroth is already pretty stressful as a tank. If you don't know, it has an ability called Glaive Combo. It hits 3 times, and if you don't have active negation, you basically just get wrecked, or your healers start crying at you. So what most people do is they just sort of pop it before the cast even starts, and then it's just like, nah, forget about it, right? If you can only dodge the next 1 or next 2 hits, you'd have to time it really well. And that would be pretty interesting. It might be an issue when it comes to the latency and stuff, so you probably need to have more of like a 3, 4, 5 dodge buffer rather than just like the next hit. Again, which is why I think Vault would be more of a DPS mechanic, because, as I said earlier, if you're going to Vault, mess up all the melee DPS just to dodge an auto attack, it just would never be worth using. Now, as I mentioned earlier, about a week ago when I first started planning this video, I made a Reddit thread on how I thought Demon Hunters would work, and how I think tanking in Legion could work to better encompass Demon Hunters as a scene. Because, you know, we already have 5 potential tanks to 2 slots, and this is now going to go 6 to 2, which is pretty extreme. So I predicted a few things. A lot of people didn't like them, but I'm going to show you them anyway, sort of go over some of the points that the people mentioned, and just sort of wrap this video up a little bit. So I'll go over to the thread that I made. And basically the core of it, and I'll leave it up so you can sort of, you know, glance through it while I'm talking, was I think they need to really theme down on Demon Hunters, because the big thing they're selling with Legion, especially when you kind of look at stuff like artifact weapons, is their theming. They're trying to re-theme and rebrand all of the classes, right? So what better way to do that than to make the tanks feel a bit more distinct and a bit more unique again? So the thing that I kind of proposed, which there are some core issues with this, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if they went something somewhat along these lines, maybe not extreme as I said it would be, right? Is if they really centered Demon Hunters around magic avoidance. So they have some kind of dodge mechanic, and then they've got like really heavy magic mitigation. So you know, I even say here, crazy high magic, limited physical, or based around some kind of life drain mechanic. Because how I was seeing it back then, right? I'm not sure if they'll still go with that whole life drain thing now that I think about it. But again, if you think about vengeance, it's about getting hit or some kind of self-sacrifice. Demon Hunters are very ritualistic. They burn out their own eyes. So maybe we would get some kind of life drain mechanic. But anyway, I'm sort of going off a bit. So I saw them theming Demon Hunters very much around magic-based attacks. And you already have Death Knights. And that's kind of what I do currently on my tanking characters. If it's a magic fight, I play my Death Knight. Or if I need Gore Fiends, basically, I play my Death Knight. Otherwise, I just play my Monk and press guard, and that's basically it. But anyway. So, at the moment, you have stuff like bears and you have stuff like warriors. And when I think of bears and I think of warriors, I think of just really tough, sturdy tanks, right? They've got a lot of health if it's a bear, and they've got lots of cooldowns if they're a warrior. And they just take less damage. What I think would be really cool is if you had the bears and the warriors being like the physical tanks, and they excelled at physical damage. You then have the Death Knights and the Demon Hunters who excelled at magical damage. And then you have the Monks and the Paladins, kind of like the middle ground. They're the ones which have healing. I know Demon Hunters have healing, but they can't heal other people, so they already have some kind of utility in that sense. And they've got like a mix of, with Paladins, they can sort of do a bit of magic absorb, a little physical absorb, and then, again, you just have Monks which just absorb everything. But yeah, so you kind of have these two hybrid tanks, the physical tanks and then the magic tanks. Now, the main complaint which came up when I proposed this idea was people worrying that it would make tanks too specialized. And that every fight you'd be swapping, oh no, we need to drop this guy and bring this guy in, and that it'd make raiding horrible. I don't actually think that would be the case. So, imagine the average fight in Hellfire Citadel. Usually what you kind of have is a pretty good mix of physical and magical. You know, most bosses are like Reaver, for example, Iron Reaver. Really straightforward fight. He auto-attacks for a lot. He does his pound, which hits for a lot of physical. And then he has artillery, which hits the tanks for a lot of magical, right? So, as a Demon Hunter, as a Death Knight, I kind of just go in there, absorb, my healers heal me, and then I press AMS and walk out the raid when he does artillery, right? So I'm kind of already in that sense, whereas on a Monk, I'll just be like Guard or Zen Med. You know, I'd use my anti-magic stuff. And as long as they kept the raids pretty well balanced, where half of the fight is physical, half of it is magical, or it's mostly magical, but then you have this sudden massive physical attack, it wouldn't really matter what tank you were on out of the, you know, new trinity of physical magic hybrid. It wouldn't matter which one you're on, because you'd be able to combat it in any sense. Yeah, okay, maybe when you get to Mythic, you might need, oh, actually, my physical tank can't do that magic ability. But if you're in Mythic raiding, you probably already have well-coordinated tanks, and your tanks already have ults. I mean, I only raid Heroic, and I have tank ults. So you just make sure that your roster has one physical and one magical, or one hybrid and one hybrid, or whatever, right? As long as you don't raid Bear Warrior, it wouldn't be that much of an issue. And in the lower difficulties, say you want to, you know, tank with 2 warriors, or tank with a warrior and a bear, or you want to tank with 2 Death Knights because for some reason people don't like Demon Hunters and everyone's still playing Death Knights or whatever, it wouldn't matter in the lower difficulties because the game is tuned so poorly. Not poorly, but the game is so over-inviting, shall we say. This is coming from the recent nerfs they've done to normal Hellfire Citadel, and I imagine that's going to be their raid philosophy going forward. You know, they wouldn't do it unless they thought that was the best way to go. So you kind of have normal, which has very limited mechanics. Heroic is an extra 1 or 2 mechanics, and then Mythic is like the big scary thing. For normal and Heroic, just having random tanks would kind of work, you know. And another thing that I said, And again, this might be too much of a pipe dream, but if they had 3 tanks, so I think it's this last bit here, um, if they had more 3-tank encounters, or they just made 3 tanks the norm, then you could have 1 physical, 1 hybrid, and 1 magic, right? And that's still a lot of option. You're not pigeonholed, because you've got 1 of 2 options of each. Most tanks have multiple tank ults, so you could have 3 tank players, and between those 3 tank players, if they all have 1 ult, you have every tanking class covered. So for the top end guilds, they're sorted. For the middle and low end guilds, again, they're sorted because they have 1 tank which covers each role, and even if they just have 3 of the same, assuming that their healers are okay and it's not really overtuned, they're probably going to be alright anyway, right? And the reason why I think bringing 3 tank roles into raiding would be good is kind of twofold. One, as I said earlier, it would make the tanks feel a bit more unique, so they'd have this new branding. So there would be more class identity, which is what they're trying to push with Legion. So it would kind of line up with their design philosophy a little bit. And 2, I don't know if you've ever been a tank, but trying to get into a guild, like a good guild, as a tank is really difficult, or at least I really struggled with it. So quite recently, I was in a guild, I left a guild, and I was like, oh, I need to find a new guild. And I was trying to find a heroic ready guild, so either already clearing heroic or just about to start. I really wasn't that picky. I just wanted to do some heroic, do mythic in a few months' time, right? That was sort of where I was at. And I was like, okay, so I need to find a guild which is already clearing heroic on a somewhat regular basis, who needs a tank. You know, in most cases, if a guild is already clearing a certain level of content, they already have the core things. Usually it's they need a couple more DPS, maybe they need a specific healer, maybe they need 1 tank in case someone else wants to swap, but it's quite difficult to get into. So in the end, I just ended up making my own guild, and that's kind of worked out for me. But that doesn't work for everyone, right? And we always have this issue of, oh, there's a massive tank shortage. I don't actually think there's that much of a tank shortage as people perceive it to be, or think there is. As someone who regularly queues up for content, I actually get faster queues as a healer on my monk than I do as a tank, right? So I think there's more of a healing issue, but anyway, that's beside the point. But it's very hard to get into the game as a tank. One, you get a lot of rage in like 5-mans because everyone hates tanks, everyone hates healers. So that's not very inviting for someone fresh to the role, so that kind of puts people off. And then in the whole raiding scene, again, as I said, most guilds already have their tanks sorted. And when I made my own guild, and I was recruiting up, when I said that I was recruiting off tank, I had loads of applicants. In the first few days of me making my guild, I had more people signed up to trial as off tank than I did DPS. I had like 2 people trialing to be hunter, and I had like 8 people trying to be a tank. Again, this might just be something with lower end, you know, well, heroic, yeah, lower end guilds. Maybe this isn't an issue in mythic. Maybe in mythic it's completely different. But I don't know. I don't come from that crowd, so I can't really comment. But yeah, I don't know. I think it would kind of work. But I'll go over the counterpoints and what other people thought, because otherwise it would just be a complete one-sided video, and that wouldn't be very helpful, right? So this was the big thing, right? The moment you specialize a tank that much, they become either mandatory or unplayable for progression. Again, this is why, for this system to work in the heavy theming, they have to balance encounters around it, right? You can't just have this new system where, like, oh, there are the 2 physical tanks, the 2 hybrid, and the 2 magic tanks, and then make a new raid tier, which is 90% magic damage. Because, yeah, if you do that, then obviously you would never bring a warrior in. You'd be like, well, I'll just take the magic tanks. And if I ever need physical, I'd bring a hybrid, so why the fuck would I need you? But just balance out the raids. Have a good mix. Hellfire Citadel already has a very good mix between both physical and magic damage. And if you know this is your design philosophy going forward, you just incorporate. I don't know. Right. But, and this was the one thing which I did really like, and it's just the one comment I'll just read off to you. And this is something that I've heard a lot of people say, is I don't want another tank. People are saying 5 is too much already. We don't really need 6. I follow the final boss podcast quite closely, and they've had a few tanking podcasts recently, and every time like, oh, you excited for Demon Hunters? Like, oh, we don't really need a sixth tank, right? So I don't feel like they can just add them unless they completely shift the whole tanking meta on its head, because otherwise we will just end up in this issue of, oh, who we bring to the raid? Well, we've got like 1 million people playing Demon Hunters signed up, and then we have our old tanks anyway. So, because if you think about it, is even if they stick with the 2 tank setup, most guilds, and yet I know players always fall in and out of the game, right? But most guilds have their roles somewhat set, and they need to recruit 1 or 2 specific things. Come Legion, there is going to be a massive influx of tanks, like a crazy influx. And this is going to be further exaggerated by the fact there are only 2 specs, right? You have melee DPS and tank. Not everyone is just going to go from playing a rogue to playing a DPS Demon Hunter. We will naturally have more tanks in the, raiding economy, so to speak. And they have to go somewhere. So, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. Just to quickly recap, I think that we will most likely have vengeance as the key word and the key mechanics, so some sort of reflect. We know they're going to be aura based, it's confirmed. They say supportive in their game manual right here. So again, we can only imagine they affect the entire raid. This might be something that we start seeing coming into the other tanks more often. We already sort of have this with anti-magic zone, which is used occasionally from Death Knight. So maybe we're going to start seeing more support based utility or raid cooldowns coming in, which aren't just tied to healers. Maybe bringing more raid cooldowns coming in, because you can't just give raid cooldowns to 1 tank. You'd have to balance it out, right? So if this is a new trend we're going to start seeing, and maybe that's how Blizzard's going to try and promote people bringing certain, classes which aren't represented before. I don't know. I just sort of wanted to get this video out while it was still somewhat relevant, and obviously before BlizzCon, because I was slacking quite a bit with it. So yeah, it'll be quite interesting to look back, sort of see where we went wrong. And thank you, Preach, for finally incentivizing me to get this done by uploading your one. I'll leave a link to both his video and the Reddit thread below. How do you think or want Demon Hunters to work? Personally, I don't really want another tank in the game. But maybe if they do something interesting with it, like maybe some things I've suggested and other people have suggested in the community, maybe I'll actually turn back on that statement and I'll look forward to leveling my own one. Anyway, I'm Tarke Cat. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, then please subscribe. I mostly do discussion vids. And yeah, BlizzCon's going to be exciting. Anyway, see you later. Bye-bye. Oh, and one more thing. Illidan is really cool.